I like to start with this slide. This was some caricatures some of my team members here at UNT did of me. Um, in this job, it's good to have some humor and some humility. Um, Humor because you will be amazed at what you're facing and some of the hard decisions that you have to make and sometimes scratching your head, so why? And humility because these are complicated times and very few of us have all the answers. And often the answers are far better arrived at an open discussion with key personnel, and you'll probably see that as we get going forward here. Um, but let's just jump right in and have some fun with this. First, uh, give you a little bit of my background. I spent 18 years at Cornell and loved those years, learned a ton, and ended up as department chair. Then I headed up a research institute at Texas A&M for 6 years and built the National Center for E-beam research there. And then I spent 6 years at University of Florida as a dean, and then 7 years as a VPR and graduate dean in Utah. A quick 1 year at Portland State before University of North Texas grabbed me and said, "Why don't you come on over here?" And if you're quick with your numbers there, you can see I'm in my 3rd year, so I'm in my 41st year of doing this gig, so great fun working in the academy. Um, so, what might you devise from that? Well, you might devise that McClellan has this 6-year itch. He just can't keep a job, or maybe he just likes working for different people, different bosses. Um, One thing you can be sure is that I've seen just a few things, and some of them curl my toes, and others have been just wonderful. And for sure, I'll add the last bullet is many of you are far better than me and likely better than each of us, and that together we really should use each other to build on our success and understanding of where we're going as VPRs. So let's start at the beginning. And I think first thing I think of is in VPRs, of course, I think of sponsored research. It's probably the number one thing people think of regarding you in your role, whether it's an associate VPR or or a full-time VPR. And it's worth taking a minute or two here and just think this through. You have multiple customers, each of them with very different needs and very different expectations. And it's important as a VPR for you to think through these and how you're going to be behaving and working with your different customers. Often you'll be guided by a council, council of principal investigators or research council. In some cases not, but it's very common to have that in place. You have 2 major operations, at least underneath your grants operation. That's the pre-award, and the other one is your post-award. I like to think in terms of your pre-award that hopefully you have very talented people working this. One of the things that you really need to think about is making sure that you're getting the job done. And by that, I really mean pushing the button, making sure submissions get in. I had some great VPRs guide me in my early years in this and say, look, Mark, you can always recover and figure out how to manage a problem at award time. What you can't recover is the fact that you didn't submit. So keep that in mind. Limited submissions, I think, are something that too many universities walk by and don't pay enough attention to. And one of the magics to limited submissions is asking faculty to be a champion and be a leader, purposely and personally asking them. It's a great way to get limited submissions moving, and universities simply should not skip that. Post-award, to me, the magic here is transparency. Just get as much transparency out as you can. To me, the only thing that really you have to stay away from are full text proposals. But other than that, there's not a whole lot that you can't share with the world, and that's of great help. Make sure you are on top of your financial compliance. Your post-award team is going to drive that heavily, and for God's sakes, make sure you watch your billing and accounts receivable. I've encountered many VPRs that have been burned in this, and it's important that you pay attention to it. What do I mean? I mean meeting quarterly with your post-award team or your accounting team. Often the billing and accounting is located over in your CFO operation. Don't worry about that. You demand quarterly meetings that you are engaged with. And the reason this is so important is even if it's over in the CFO will seldom have that personal connection with the academy, with the academic side. They will seldom have that understanding of principal investigator behavior, department chair interaction, dean interaction. You will have that, and you will be able to step in, ensure that reports are getting done, and that things are managed. In the world of sponsored programs, you also have, of course, this big world of contracts. And I really think it's important to pay attention to your contracting systems and make sure you're doing that efficiently and effectively. Contract negotiation is a big deal. And I think a lot of people, a lot of faculty forget that you are there to help represent them. And honestly, how many faculty do you know? Of course, they think they're the better negotiator, that they would get the better arrangement. But honestly, they'll often forget critical factors, and besides which, they don't have the legal authority to negotiate on behalf of the university. Your operation does. So it's important to pay attention to that and try to teach faculty about your role in that. My last bullet there is rate the risk. If you have a contract vehicle being assembled with an entity that you can't find a Dun and Bradstreet on, that you have no history on, for God's sakes, don't put the university at risk for it. Ask the colleges to step in. They often have a far closer relationship, and they can go, yes, Mark, this is dependable, and it's enough so we'll put our F&A on the line to guarantee the contract. Or they'll raise serious questions where they don't have that history and they can't see it. And if you can't see it and the college can't see it, maybe you shouldn't be executing that contract. So be proactive on that. I talk openly with my deans about this and say, look, I will only go so far, guys. If I can't see clear evidence, then you have the opportunity to step in and be the underwriter. I'm not a bank. I don't have the resources. And believe me, you can get burned badly. In my worst case on this, I had a $500,000 loss that had not been caught and had been delayed. So stay on top of it, quarterly, get it done. Your F&A rate, be aware that you have a negotiated rate, but it's good to talk about what is your actual effective every year. Where are you really hitting? And be open about that. If you're forgiving F&A overhead in order to attract a contract or something, well, that hits you in your bottom line, and you need to be able to talk openly about that. Your training systems and your tracking systems. I've had experience working in Kuali, Cayuse, and Huron. And I've got opinions about all three. And not all good, not all bad. But obviously know your system. When you're changing a system, ask tons of questions. Number one thing I'd recommend is if you're changing horses to a new system, get in touch with other VPRs at schools operating under that program. That's when you'll get the true insight as to what that program's like. Don't go by hearsay. Don't go by what's the known knowledge, go directly back to the VPRs that are running those, talk to them. We obviously have other issues around sponsored programs. Public access to data is a good one. This can be a real conundrum concerning the costs on that. I'm a strong proponent of using partnership with libraries and encouraging faculty to post their data in public repositories, and then use the libraries as a permanent pointing source to where the data is available. And I find that's very, very functional. On each of these sort of subject areas, I'll try and end with a quick story, because stories are fun and sometimes they get across a good point. So the story here is what happens when the Office of Inspector General comes knocking. They do come knocking. And when they do come knocking, it can be a fretful, concerning issue. In the case that I had them walk in on me for was questions about time and effort. And what they were focused on was a specific individual faculty member who had multiple federal grants and a series of graduate students working on the grants. And the question was, prove to me that those graduate students are appropriately billing their time to the appropriate project, to the appropriate grant. Now, I don't know about you, but the last time I talked to faculty members about the time graduate students work on grants, I guarantee you, you're not going to find a great set of records on that. It's very challenging, and this took a lot of negotiation to work through that. I bring it to you just simply as a story that, you know, these can be challenging times, and when OIG comes and wants to talk, they usually have a reason. Often that reason is because they've had a whistleblower say they think there's a problem here. And when they do that, it's like a dog with a bone. They are determined to try to figure out how it worked out. As it worked out in this case, we got a clean bill of health, but nevertheless, it was not super easy to document, not super easy to verify, and it taught us a lot about how to do a better job at this sort of thing. Let me go on. I'm going to go on to one more, and then I'm going to pause for questions. The second one is one of my favorite areas, and that's research development. Because the first question you'll be expected to know about is sponsored programs and whether you can execute and do the job well. The second question will be, can you double our numbers? And that's always the question. Can you double our numbers? Don't fall for that. Do not fall for that. Put in all kinds of planning and expectations, but don't fall for that old double of numbers. You have a big lift here, because remember, the faculty that are doing this work have annual reviews that you're not a part of, have a tenure and promotion process that generally you're not too connected with, and yet you're being asked, can you greatly expand our grantsmanship? There are tools you can use, and we're going to talk about some of them here, but be careful that you don't overcommit. How are you going to cause change? In fact, that is probably the key answer. And that's probably the way to answer people when they say, have you got a way to double up our numbers? Well, more importantly, have you got a way, a method, an approach to change the game, to make things happen? What is your plan? What's your strategies? In fact, think about it in terms of goals, strategies, and programs that are going to cause change. And I'll show you a very simple approach that I use on the next slide. But it's important for you as a research administration group to think through that and have a logical approach to this. So that's critically important. Funding opportunities are important, and certainly one of the most important things you can do is bring funding opportunities to the forefront in front of faculty and encourage them to engage. Many of us create centers and institutes, and we'll talk about that in more depth. But clearly, those are opportunities for you to rally groups of faculty that should be, by their nature of working together, better prepared for going after major funding initiatives. Proposal development to me is the key, because telling your story about the need for funding is the way you win that funding. And it's hard sometimes to get that across to faculty. Um, Having an ability to bring in external specialists to help guide very large proposals should be something that's automatic and in your thinking about your planning for how to do big lifts. Have a budget set aside for you to be able to engage like that and be supportive, and let your deans, let your faculty know you're ready to be there to support them and improve their likelihood of success by bringing in specialists. And there are a number of specialists out there that you can tackle for that. At UNT and other schools, we use the grant proposal development specialists. Here we have now hired 8 of these specialists. We're very excited about the implications, and they're already making a difference. Our grant proposals were up 17% this year. Our awards were up 25%. Our research expenditures up 20%. These folks are already engaging hugely and making a big impact. So our faculty are really feeling like they've got a great support right there beside them. They actually can go after large grants and large grant lifts and make a difference there. Grantsmanship training is something very magical and something that you should think about. I believe strongly that we train faculty to be great in their disciplines, but often faculty just suck at making a case for the value of their work. They just do. They're not great at that. They know their discipline, and they really need to be taught the art of grantsmanship, the art of writing to a review team of 12 people sitting around at a table, and how are they going to make the judgment of whether to fund or not. The art of writing so that every word carries value, writing almost like a newspaper person, really with great intent. And we do faculty training with grantsmanship training like this. It's a full immersive all-day effort. And this year, for the first year, we've also extended to graduate students. You can also implement grant polishing institutes, boot camps where you work with faculty to really polish off grant submissions and particularly resubmissions. I don't think we often talk about the resubmission process and how valuable that feedback is. And with just a little bit of work, you can heighten the odds of success. I want to tell you just a little bit of a story on this. A good friend of mine, Tom, was the VPR at University of Utah. University of Utah at the time was a $600 million awards program coming in every year. And I said, Tom, you know, you have a huge operation here, massive engineering research, massive cancer research. Who's your best? Who's knocking it out of the park in terms of grantsmanship? And you know, he looked at me, he said, you know, you're not going to believe this, Mark, but the most successful department in my university is the Department of Pediatrics. And I said, pediatrics? Are you kidding me? He said, no, but you need to understand what their culture is. They have a very small department. And when he said they were most successful, he meant in terms of nailing and getting their grants, their success rate. He said, this department has agreed as a culture to never send a proposal out the door until all the faculty of the department have had a chance to red pen it. Wow. You talk about a culture of expectation, of engagement and improvement and transparency. And it showed that department was just knocking it out of the park, far better success rate than any other department. But it's very unusual to see that kind of culture. I often kidded with departments that I would throw them a quick $10,000 if they would just agree to take on that culture. And of course, as you can imagine, that's a hard one to take on. There are other things you can do, immersing faculty in Washington, D.C. into the agencies. We have a DC Faculty Fellows Program, other universities do, where we select young faculty, junior faculty. We train them for 3 months, get them really tuned up, ready to talk to grant managers, program managers in DC. And then we literally fly them to DC as a team and get them engaged. So it makes a big difference. These young people come back very fired up, very engaged, high energy, and just a great program. Another unusual thing is the Carnegie Mellon Storyboard. If you've ever had friends at Carnegie Mellon, talk to them about their big grantsmanship when NIFA, the National Institute of Food and Ag, was releasing some of their very large CAP grants, $20 million grants. A huge surprise to the land grant universities was the success of Carnegie Mellon in landing one or more of these $20 million grants. And they attribute part of their success to the storyboard approach that they took to building their grants. And what I mean by storyboard, they would bring key players into the room, say, okay, guys, throw all your paperwork away. We are literally going to storyboard around this room the entire design of this grant. And then you will have to write from scratch to meet the expectations of the grant. Wow, very, very powerful approach, very dramatic, very significant, and really a cool approach. They also, to me, they were one of the leads in pioneering the idea of full-on grant manager after award, where this was a manager who was to execute the 20 million, not the PI, but a grant manager, had a lot of authority to execute and consequently produced a very high productivity and a very strong engagement with the sponsor and execution of the grant. Going to end this with a second quick story. I first started this grantsmanship training approach, this idea that faculty really need help in helping make the case to the value of their work. At Texas A&M, I was running the research institute there and had heard about this process that the veterinary school was looking at. And I loved it. I thought it was great. I could see that in many of my faculty that they were struggling, making a good case and getting their initial grants successfully funded. And so I brought that into my institute. And at the time, my institute had about 150 faculty in it. So it was a good microcosm to try that. And it was same design, one day, full immersion, 8 hours, intense training on grantsmanship. And I had faculty come up to me left and right, thanking me for bringing that training to the Institute. And I had one particular faculty, his name was Glenn, good friend of mine from horticulture at Texas A&M. And Glenn came up to me, he said, Mark, he said, I've been doing this for 20 years. I thought this was a joke. I'm sorry, I've written so many grants. He said, oh my God, had I realized the impact of this training, if I had ever done this 15 years ago, my entire program today would be in a completely different tier of funding, and I'd be completely different in terms of my approach of things. He said it was transformative. So moral of the story is even old dogs can learn new tricks, and I always say that to myself even today. I like to think every day I try to learn new things. So um, your faculty can too be encouraging and be supportive of them. Okay, I'm going to give my voice just a little bit of a break here. And if there's a question, be happy to try and answer that question. And Elijah's going to help me here and see if anyone has a question to pop out here. We'll take a second.
Hey, Mark, this is Jason. You know, I know you can't make it on Friday, and you mentioned the follow-on sessions. We're going to have one focused on when you keep things in-house versus when you maybe outsource. And you mentioned in this slide about contracting for external grant specialists. That's going to be one of our topics. And since you can't join us on Friday, I'm wondering if you can share, how do you balance out the sort of proactive versus reactive nature of that? In other words, do you try to get somebody on a retainer that you can apply to a group quickly? Do you have everybody always have, all of us have different institutional policies around performing RFPs, and you know, what has worked for you, and do you have any suggestions around that concept?
Yeah, so my approach has been easy. I must admit, ever since my Texas A&M days, I've had a particular group that I engage with year in and year out. I have almost a standing contract that we have to negotiate and put out a call for RFPs on that. It is heavily focused to the grantsmanship training, but as it turns out, that same team has a lot of depth where they will come in and work on big lifts, major grant lifts, and it just means that we have to augment the contract to allow that to happen. You know, and that's worked out fairly well. But you know, I just think it's a powerful, powerful message to tell faculty teams that are attempting a major lift that you're right with them, that you're going to put money on the table, and you're going to ensure that they get help in terms of polishing and getting that grant. I think one of the challenges is actually getting your faculty to listen to the external experts and to incorporate them, so their suggestions. So that's important. All right, let's keep going, and we'll again. I know there are questions coming on the chat, and I promise you I will do my best in answering those later too. But and of course at the end if we have time. All right, let me keep going here. So I mentioned have a plan and be transparent about that plan. Be proudful of that plan. I'm reaching back to my USU days when I was VPR there. And thanks to a great partner of mine who was head of my communications strategic planning, Anna McIntyre. Anna was brilliant and helped me understand how to get organized, more importantly, how to communicate what we're doing. And we came up with this portfolio approach. What we did, like I said early on, we set a series of goals, very few, 3, 4 goals that research administration was going to do to execute and have as our goals. And we believed if we met those goals, by gosh, we would actually lift research and lift it in a strong way. Each of the goals had a series of very planned specific strategies. You're just looking at the top third of let's see, point there, top third of the page here. There's another 2/3 below with other strategies, and then we cited the different programs that we implemented to execute the strategy. And then we progressed through time to show how that was being implemented, when it was being implemented, when it was not, when it was being turned off, if you would, or changes that were happening. Oh my God, guys, I'm telling you, this was worth its weight in gold. I reported every year to the faculty senate And the faculty senate, hands down, said this was one of the best presentations. They understood absolutely precisely the way we were approaching things, and they really appreciated a strong sense of what we were putting in place, when we were putting in place, and how it was working. It's a great way to do it. So think about that. Be proactive. Okay, so cores and shared use facilities. You heard Jason Carter. Jason's one of my experts on this. If I have questions, Jason would be the first place I'd be calling. There are many others too that really have worked on groups to figure out how best to do that. And APLU, by the way, has had some great workshops on this, as well as some of these others. But all of you have shared use facilities or core facilities, often covering animals, labs, various instrumentation, technologies or services. Invariably, they cost you money. Invariably, you subsidize it. And you do that for the greater good of all the researchers, and hoping that it pays for itself in terms of new grants coming in, et cetera. But generally, it's a pretty hefty cost that you put behind these efforts. You do need to think about it. How does it function? How will it offer internal services versus external services? What will be your rates? What are your maintenance costs? Have you done a good cost accounting basis? And if you haven't, or if you don't know what that term means, sit down with a good CPA and get them to think you through exactly how to do that analysis, so you can stand proudly when a federal agency says, how have you arrived at this cost structure? And you've got the numbers and background to frame that up. Setting your fee structures is not straightforward, because generally you can't do a full recovery. Those of you who can, God bless you. Talk to me later. I'd love to know all your secrets, because I'm always balancing recovery of costs with encouragement of use, and underlying that with subsidies. So it's a real balancing all the way through, and something that you need to pay attention to and think through. A whole special class of these is this right-hand side of the table, and that's your HIPAA compliant clinics. You want to be pretty careful here in thinking this through. Where I first ran into this was in Utah. I was very new to this, and had to really learn a lot. Understanding whether you're a covered entity, whether you're involved in furnishing, billing, or receiving payment. By the way, when someone says the word HIPAA, they're talking about insurance. They're talking about this billing, furnishing, receiving payment. And that's where this all came from. And there are HIPAA privacy rules, HIPAA security rules that immediately blanket you if you're a covered entity. Often you're a business associate, but even in the business associate where you're simply helping carry out these activities, watch yourself, because you also have security rule blankets and contract specific rules that you have to be aware of. So why do I put this here? I put this here because of risk. VPRs often, to be frank, are left out in the cold when risk happens. People go like this and they look at you, say, solve it. And when I was at Utah State, my president at the time was Stan Albrecht, and Stan was just a wonderful guy and just wanted to really, push the research envelope and keep things going. And we were doing great work with clinical services. I went to Stan and I said, Stan, are we okay? Are we insured? What happens when we have a breach? Because it's sure looking like everybody around me is having breaches, and there are real penalties to pay on this. And the more I dug into this Everybody goes to cyber liability insurance. Oh my God, guys, look closely at your cyber insurance. I guarantee you, you are not at all covered the way you should be. And Stan looked at me and said, Mark, I don't have an answer. It's up to you to build that answer. So we set about a plan early on in my career there to build a reserve, and I'm sure it was not enough, but we took a target of 1% of our award structure. At that time, we were hitting 100 million a year. So my goal was $1 million in cash. And we did that. We met that, and that sat in deep investment accounts, but it sat there as cash available, because I just knew this was a risky undertaking. It's one that you really should pay attention to, and if you're involved with it, ask the questions, because I'm telling you, the CFO might not necessarily be the one to say, oh yeah, I got this covered. They will often say, Mark, how will you cover this? So think about that. And just to give you an idea of some of the let me point to the right here, some of the kinds of fees that you can rack up on this, pretty darn significant. So watch that pretty carefully. Okay, centers and institutes. Oh my God, to me, centers and institutes seem to be the panacea. Everybody wants to build a center of institute because they think that's the way you're going to double your money. And centers and institutes can be wonderful and can be highly effective. But I'm telling you, it's not necessarily the path to doubling your money. So let's talk about it a little bit. They can be very varied. They can be large, with serious investment by you as a VPR, sometimes at the college level. It can be well organized, or they can be Tom's favorite stuff over in the corner of his lab. I used to be a pretty hard ass about this. I used to have not a whole lot of appreciation for Tom's work in the corner of his lab. And I've become far more open to the idea that, you know what, we need to get word out about the talent of our faculty. And if Tom has a neat idea that he's working on there, and he wants to define that as a center of excellence, I'm not sure I want to be the one to squash that. A good boss of mine when I was a young whippersnapper at Cornell, David Call. Dave was the dean of agriculture there, and David said, he said, Mark, every faculty member is a program here in this college. Don't you forget that. And he was talking to me as a new department chair, and he really impressed on me that expect a lot of your faculty, and they'll rise to that. So I've become more tempered in my expectation. I like the approach of defining what is a university center or institute, what's a college center of an institute, and what's a professorial based center, and not necessarily limiting that, but rather having a good sense of what's out there. And I must admit, I don't do this well, but I think it is important to do this well, because it adds a lot of depth to your understanding of your capacity of your programs to be responsive and be engaged. Sometimes some of the challenging issues around centers or institutes is gaining access. Who gets to play? Who's engaged? Who's not? There are some that want to put up the walls and say only us special people can be in this institute, and others that are more broadly engaging. And I tend to lean towards the more broadly engaging, but I also tend to have a more of an attitude of trying to lift the entire harbor. I want to see entire institutional change, not just rocket ships taking off on with great ideas. And you can craft behavior sometimes by the way you budget your systems or the metrics you put with your systems. Probably one of the most fun times of building I had was when I was running the Institute for Food Science and Engineering at Texas A&M. Reported to two different deans. I loved those years. 6 years at A&M was great, fun place. Our faculty of the Institute came up with a neat idea, this concept of getting into the world of electron beam technologies. And, I convinced my deans that, we really should do this. We could make a go of this. And if they could, give me a footprint of space, I could really make this happen. Well, Texas A&M's an interesting place. When I first actually was implementing this thing, this national center, I was called before all the vice presidents, and the first question I was asked, and this would only happen at Texas A&M, and I love Texas A&M. This is their incredible, great friends. But the first question was, how's this going to affect football? And second question was, how much energy are you going to take? But anyways, it was great discussions. But before all of that, when we first had the concept of really going after a major center and lifting this out of that institute, the board of trustees got involved, and they said, we want to have a conversation with this Dr. McClellan and find out what the heck he's talking about building here on this campus. And so they brought me in. Chair of the board of regents was there and sat me down at the end of this long table. And he said, okay, Dr. McClellan, what are you going to do with my building? I understand you want to use my building for something. I said, oh boy, I wasn't sure what I was in for. So I started to describe the concept that we, the faculty of the Institute, had come up with, that we had found a donor who would be really willing to work with us, and how we were going to use this technology and how it would apply to spaceship sanitation, food processing, all kinds of things. Finished that with him, and he was dead silent. And he said, well, sir, he said, Dr. McClellan, I asked you here to come tell me time. And instead, you came and told me how to build a clock. So for God's sakes, keep going, do what you're doing, because this is all great stuff. The moral of the story here is have big ideas, have visions, and talk about them, and fire people up, because they will get excited. They'll want to be a part of your team and want to be with you on that. Often in this role as VPR, you will have a responsibility around economic development. And economic development's interesting because it's, to be frank, it's not often what we've been trained to do as VPRs. Many of us have come up through the ranks. We've been scientists or department chairs, and maybe we've been deans someplace. But economic development is sometimes challenging. So I like to start with the three special words, sort of like in the world of selling houses, location, location, location. To me, economic development is all about partnership, partnership, partnership. It's who do you bring to the table and who are you able to engage with, partner with. That's where your pathway to success in economic development is. Often it is access to the university. And once your shingle is out there as the economic development guru, if you would, you are seen as the access or pathway in. And that's super, super important. I can't underestimate this. Many corporate entities and nonprofits get incredibly frustrated by connecting and trying to ferret through where they should be talking with people and how they can talk to people inside the university. By hanging out an economic development shingle, you get to be that pathway in. Now, having said that, you have to have a strong engagement, a strong way to provide that and make that ease of single point contact really functional and really engaging. It creates all kinds of opportunities and of course all kinds of exposure to you with great rewards are potential. Um, Workforce development is a big part of this, particularly today. I honestly I think over the last 5, maybe 10 years, this has become the cornerstone of economic development, is what you're doing in workforce development. And of course, all of us lean heavily on the academic side of the house. We're creating these degrees, et cetera. But it's important to be able to articulate that and the types of degrees and the types of workforce that are needed. And there are all kinds of ways to argue this and to make that case. And remember I said earlier about the ease of contracting. Ease of contracting is huge. One of the things we did here at UNT under the operations with our departments here is to completely restructure our contracting system so we have various risk levels and high-speed contracting where we can, and a paced contracting where we need time to ensure safety of contracts, risk management of contracting. But it's important to get your hands around that and get it functioning well. There's nothing more frustrating both to an outside partner nor to your university faculty to find a contracting system that fails to deliver. And of course, we all think of tech transfer, technology commercialization, big part of this. For us, this contracting business is a big deal. We execute over 700 contracts this year alone, just huge, many of them small and engaging, but that's okay. Many of them opening up pathways to follow on corporate relations and more importantly, helping our external partners find solutions. Sometimes I put that second to last bullet there, metrics can be a challenge and that's indeed true. Quick story about the value of this role. When I was at Texas A&M, I was not a VPR, I was head of a research institute, but I had a very, very keen interest in engaging with the private sector. I wanted to get my faculty really connected with major parts of the food industry, the food support industry, and et cetera. And so I was constantly bringing corporate entities into the world of the way we operated the Institute. I also made sure that I had seats for the Brazos Valley Economic Development on all of my boards. It was a great partnership with them. They were very engaged, very supportive, added a lot of value to our conversations. And when I was leaving Texas A&M heading to Florida, before I left, the Economic Development group said, we see you have a national meeting in New Orleans. Mark, you have brought so many corporations to the Valley, so much engagement. We'd like to buy out the back end of Emeril's Restaurant. You invite all your corporate partners. This is a way to thank them for being engaged. Well, I'm telling you guys, this doesn't happen. This does not happen automatically. This happens because you have very real impact. Very real impact. And if I could do that at a institute level, we can all do this as a VPR level, and it's a good opportunity there. I'm going to pause for a second, see if there are any questions. Give my voice just a second to recover there. Feel free to click on your mic and throw a question out if you got one. Quiet. Everybody's either thinking or has no question. That's okay. We're going to keep going. and keep things going. Oh, we're into a fun one. Research compliance. Yay. This is the exciting one, right? That we all have so much fun as VPRs. Okay, well, what we want to do is try to keep you out of jail, keep your boss out of jail. We want you to take it on seriously. Guys, this is a complex area. It's one that has lots of twists and turns, and it's one that you want to be engaged with, be a part of it. Don't stand back and say, "Oh, I've got compliance people." You be engaged with your compliance people. First off, they need to know that you care about them and what they're doing. And secondly, it's risky business. You need to know what they're up to and what they're doing and how it's happening. Because to be honest with you, when the crap hits the fan, and the crap will hit the fan, it's going to land in your lap. So you might as well be a part of the conversation anyways. So I like to start with conflict of interest and conflict of commitment. These are two principles that it's important for you as a VPR to be out there championing, helping the faculty and the administration and administrators realize the reality of this and the importance that everyone must really know what these are all about. Conflict of interest, of course, is regarding benefit that I may achieve as an engaged person due to the fact that I have relationships. And that is a conflict of interest if something were to execute and I receive that personal benefit. Conflict, and that can be financial, it can be other, and it can be me, my spouse, or close in family. Conflict of commitment, of course, is regarding the expectations of my position and my job. And I think on this call, I'm probably the only only VPR who has been sued on the issue of conflict of interest and brought uh, uh, to Supreme Court of the state. And at the end of the day, I'm proud to say, after 6 years of battling, won the court case. So this is a big deal to me. It's important that taxpayers of your state have faith in the fact that your researchers and your research operations operate without conflict of interest and operate with a strong sense of what is your commitment to the job and ensuring you don't have a conflict to that commitment. Be aware that if you're in the world of human subjects research and you're considering AHRP accreditation, that once you enter AHRP accreditation, there's a requirement for institutional conflict of interest. Institutional conflict of interest is an interesting one. And when you dig into that, you start to realize, well, that's not only incorporating your purchasing office, for example, but your executives right up through your board of trustees. And you must have in place a mechanism to ensure that you would have a compliance there. Let me give you an example. A faculty member chooses to engage in a human subjects type research around seating position at various desk designs that Steelcase has. Oh, and your university is purchasing Steelcase desks, or a member of your administration or board has ownership in part of Steelcase. Those are direct conflicts of interest, and firm degrees of separation and independence must be created and documented to assure that you can operate that grant without any undue influence. This is institutional conflict of interest that must be either managed or ensured, isolated, and therefore moves aside. Often faculty are not attuned to your compliance boards. And what I'm talking about is your institutional boards. that are instituted by way of federal compliance, where you are mandated to have these in place. IRB for human subjects, IACUC, biosafety for your biologics, radiation would be another one. And these are boards that stand independent of the administration. You do not get to instruct a compliance board how to behave. You instruct, you engage with them and learn from them, and you apply rules and regulations in terms of operations. But those boards stand as independent. It's important to be aware of that. They're both there to protect you, but more importantly, they're there to protect the subjects matter of the discussion, whether it be radiation use, biologics, animals, or humans, and that can be very important. VPRs are often faced, of course, with research misconduct issues that they have to address. Research misconduct, of course, it classically is defined as plagiarism, falsification, or fabrication in only those three areas. All of you, I assure you, have strong policies and hopefully well-written procedures for these. When you go beyond these three things, you are in the world of research ethics. And I believe at that point, you're in an employee behavior mode. A way to approach this is to think about this as you as a VPR get to execute and ensure that your sponsored programs, operations, your adherence to compliance is happening, and you can restrict people in terms of their access to these things if they're not behaving well. But you really cannot cross the line to dictating something about, for example, a faculty member's appointment, or a mitigation or censure of a faculty member. That is an employee action, and you really need to engage with the academic side, typically the provost, to make that sort of thing happen. When you keep it clean like that, I trust me, you will have a much more smoother engagement and operation of your research misconduct. We're going to talk more about this in the next slide, so hang on. Export controls, big deal these days. Many of us are looking into that and using export control type projects to capture new grants. Obviously, we're typically looking for the fundamental research exclusion. You have to be aggressive and really pushing for that. And where you can't, of course, you need to put in proper safeguards. 900-pound gorilla that's standing on your doorstep, and if you don't already know about it, you need to know about it, is the controlled unclassified work, information and contracts that you may be engaging in. This is insidious the way it is coming into play in so many different contracts. And if you have not heard the latest, greatest news, just start Googling the new cybersecurity maturity model certification that's coming out of DoD. They expect this to be fully implemented in the next 60 months. This is going to cost you some money to do these certifications. You will have to be audited and certified. The cheap part of the money will be the auditing process you'll go through. The more expensive part will be your actual engagement. How do you ensure things as simple as you've got mag locks on doors? Now, who's looking at the logs? Who's actually doing the check to make sure those mag locks that are registering users going through that door are appropriate? And these are things that, to be frank, many of us have taken fairly casually, And the CMMC is not going to allow that to happen anymore. There have just been too many breaches on this. A few of us have been able to successfully engage in classified information. In general, when we do that associated with the university, it has to be a completely solely owned but dedicated 501c3 that, for all intents and purposes, is 100% independent of the university in the way they operate. At Utah State, it was my Space Dynamics Laboratory that did this. Again, many of you have these. If you're interested in getting into that type of work, it behooves you to understand the pros and cons of how we have done this in the past and how one might do that moving forward. There are other critical issues regarding compliance, some associated with you, some not. Many of us have environmental health and safety that are not a part of your operation. They report to the Vice President of Finance, for example. To me, that's a bit crazy. In my world, I have my biosafety committee reports to my Vice President of Finance. So that means all our recombinant DNA work, all of our regenerative medicine work, that would all go to the Vice President, the CFO, for his management and approval. And these are vestiges of older designs, to be frank. And if you're under that, you should take a look at APL's use task force regarding laboratory safety and look at it closely, because it talks about unifying these all under one authority, and that authority is of course very typically you, the Vice President of Research. I often get people saying, well, Mark, I don't think I want to worry about waste, or I don't want to worry about asbestos removal, construction, et cetera. You know what, guys? You have, to be very frank, a far better analytic approach to this type of work. You think along the right lines of how to manage it, how to implement it, because you already have way over there on that other side, all these other things that you do. When you have a strong team, this is very straightforward. At Utah State, I had full EH&S under my operation, and I'd encourage VPRs to open that conversation and keep it going, because it doesn't make sense that you do a split here. Too often you get into operations that are really iffy without it bringing under one roof. All right, a fun story to wrap this up. Research compliance, policies, procedures, and hoaxes. Any of you who might have followed Twitter, et cetera, over the years might recognize that I had a very interesting run-in with a faculty member at an institution who was engaged actively in falsifying data for the purpose of producing a hoax. And the hoax was a part of their research. And it was incredibly difficult thing to tease apart, to get into the middle, to find out what was the intent and purpose, and to engage the research misconduct process to help investigate and analyze this. And as it turns out, in this particular case, the hoaxes were aimed at a particular class of individuals, namely editors. And the expectation stated by the researcher was to evaluate the behavior of those editors. So the first claim on this by numerous accusations was that this was research misconduct due to fabrication of data and submission of that. And so I found a basis, there was a basis for looking at this, and ran through this process. As it turned out, interestingly, the faculty process of review stepped back and decided this was not a case of fabrication because it was a declared case of hoaxing as a part of a stated intent of research. However, since the hoax was being conducted against the editors, I found that as VPR that they were not compliant with human subjects expectations, and I censured the individual and would not allow the individual to engage in sponsored research because of a very pervasive sense of disregard regarding human subjects. That individual has since resigned and is no longer a faculty member that I'm aware of. But this is the kind of things you can get into the middle of to try to tease out. But I have a very interesting follow-up on this, and I wanted to talk about, and that is the difference between research misconduct and false claims investigation. So let's remind ourselves, research misconduct, you're evaluating a researcher, you've got a claim that's been submitted to you, or you yourself as VPR have arrived at an assertion that there's a problem. There's still the three main classifications, although in 2013, the Office of Inspector General out of NSF patently declared that padding of curricula vitae in grant submissions is straight up considered a fabrication and should be considered a research misconduct, which is interesting. I'm not sure all VPRs are on board with that, but that was well documented and is out there. And there are other things that are often talked about, but the three pillars still remains well defined. If I have any guidance for you, follow your policy, follow it letter by letter, literally put your policy in a 3-ring binder. When you have a case, make notes in the margin and follow it precisely. Make sure you follow your procedures precisely. Why do I say that? Is because when grievances happen, the number one way that a research misconduct fails and is thrown out is because the VPR did not follow the instructions, your own rules. So please don't get caught in that. You're too good. Follow your own rules and follow it very, very carefully. Make notes, be very, very precise. In the research misconduct process, we consider someone innocent until proven guilty, until that's arrived at. It is a highly confidential process because you want to defend and protect all reputations, both an accuser and a recipient of that accusation. It's a strong analysis by committee of peers, the inquiry committee, the investigation committee, and you have specific actions as VPR you can take, and a provost has actions that he or she can take. Now let's talk about false claims. False Claims Act's been around for a while, 1863. And basically, the False Claims Act says if persons knowingly submit a false claim to the government, then today you are liable for triple damages plus penalties. And there are rewards for whistleblowers, cash rewards. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of concern about this. And so if over on the other side of the page, over research misconduct, you're dealing with a federal contract issue of research misconduct, you may have false claims immediately engaged. And that's what I want to talk to you about. Institutions are highly sensitive to this and highly aggressive because they do not want to be hung out for triple damages and penalties, nor paying separately for whistleblowers. How big is this? In FY19, the federal government collected $2.2 billion in false claims payments. Duke University paid $112 million. And I'm telling you, when that happened, the world changed for us in a big, big way. Okay, let's get to the nuance here. So you see, I believe that these things cannot happen in concert. You cannot effectively run a research misconduct and do it with all the confidentiality and innocent until proven. At the same time, you personally, as the same authority, cannot run a false claims investigation. It counters each other too strongly. And invariably, you would be bumping up against the principles of each other. This was a recent conversation that I've had extensively with general counsel. And in the end, all parties agreed to separate this. And I think it's smart for you as VPRs to think about this. I believe the rules of engagement do not necessarily allow for the same issue. And the problem too is if you're not in research misconduct and you're over here in false claims only engages when you're running against an accusation of a false claim to the federal government. In other words, someone has asserted something, claimed to the federal government, and there's been a cash transfer. Well, guess what? Generally, that's in your world. I mean, it's in your world of grants and contracts. So you would almost immediately be forced over into research misconduct, and the two are not compliant with each other. So I strongly suggest you open that conversation often with someone like general counsel and get this talked about as to how these worlds would be kept separate so that an appropriate research misconduct might be able to be executed even though independently from a different quarter, a False Claims Act could be investigated. We're really running short on time, so I want to keep moving if you don't mind, and we'll see if we can catch some questions at the end. International research and our buddies, your buddy, the FBI. All right, let's just start with something. First, remember, always remember, we are a university. You are a university. You represent that university, and that university, all universities in general, are in the business of encouraging a broad engagement to help discoveries and investigations of new concept, new sciences, new technologies. And by doing that, we want a worldwide engagement. And so that should be a principle right up front. Have that and embrace that, seek that, and seek ways to make it happen. Okay. Second, appreciate the need to protect intellectual property. Whether that's your faculty's intellectual property, a visitor's intellectual property, whatever, it's appropriate. This is not property that belongs to everyone. Okay, as you're managing your interaction internationally, start with a very proactive, positive working relationship with the FBI. I've always had that. They've always been great friends and counsel, and at times they've been incredibly proactive and supportive and guiding. Have a good conflict of interest policy and conflict of commitment policy in place. Understand how these two are implicated by your faculty possibly engaging internationally as well as nationally. Ask yourself, do you have a good international affiliations disclosure process? If you don't, create it, get it going, get people talking about their international work. This is a time for transparency and full disclosure. Let's get it out there. When people are transparent and disclosing, it's amazing what you can make happen. To this day, I've got faculty engaged with China. I've got faculty engaged all around the world. I want to see that happen, and I can do that when I have a full engagement and transparency as faculty are seeking opportunities. So have good procedures in place for disclosures and require disclosure, require transparency. There's nothing to hide here. It's when people are hiding relationships or benefits that they may be receiving that they're not disclosing, or impinging on their job as a faculty member, conflict of commitment, that's when they get in trouble. And if we're talking about international visitors coming to visit and work, let's make sure everybody understands the culture and rules and principles of behavior inside our laboratories. Are you proactively conducting restricted party screenings, whether it be with external entities that your faculty are working with or visitors that are coming in? Be proactive with it. Be engaged with it. Have your international programs engaged with you, and make sure you're engaged, because a lot of the concerns and questions often will circle around issues related to research. Are you staying aware and vigilant of, let's just say, influences that don't feel right? Something's not quite what you would expect as a typical engagement, or a kind or beneficial engagement. Think about it. Ask lots of questions. Ask questions of the host before the engagement happens. Ask questions of the sponsor. Does the sponsor of visitors respect your rules and rights and support that? I'll end this with what I can only say is a partial story, because there's a limit to what I can say. University of North Texas was in the news a year ago when we released 15 Chinese scholars. We have other Chinese scholars here, but we released 15 Chinese scholars. It was a very challenging, difficult situation. And to this day, I am limited by what I can describe to you. However, I will go back to say my top points above this bullet, this last bullet, are very important. Do you proactively conduct restricted party screenings? Are you aware of what sponsors of visitors expect of their behavior and rules when they come? Do your visitors understand the expectations of privacy and intellectual property? It's important to have that very clear, and I would recommend that this be done with a strong training program for all visitors that come in. I'm going to keep going here because we're going to run out of time. You operate now as VPR and associate VPR, you operate a team of employees. And it's important that you think about them as an engaged team. They're your executive team. There's lots of things to figure out here. There's project management as you're trying to execute things, you're trying to keep things moving. And sometimes your team can get out of whack. And I guess what I'm talking about is trying to keep a sense of transparency and openness among your team members. One of the things I espouse to is that I don't always have the right answer. In fact, I often find myself starting out with the wrong answer, and I expect my team members to push me, and we may start on one corner of the table, but end up with a decision at another. I make sure my team knows that's okay, that it's okay for them to be wrong, and it's okay for me to be wrong. It's much more important to be empowered and engaged, and we use all our thinking to try and make great decisions and discussions. This was so important that I wrote a story on LinkedIn, and if you're curious, you can go to my LinkedIn page and you'll see it, 30 on Thursdays, where we set up a very purposeful effort to make sure that the support infrastructure, the staff that are supporting the directors of major operations are really knowledgeable and understanding of those operations and what I'm asking those directors to accomplish. And oh my Lord, it was night and day. It really helped those support staff be there for those directors and be far, far more engaged. Research communications, you can't do enough of it. Be creative, be engaged, and try to make it happen. Probably one of the most creative approaches I took was in 2011 when I brought this crazy, crazy idea that I wanted to use TEDx as a way to really, really talk about research. And we ran it for 6 years. And there's Lisa Barreau, who is a part of those teams. Just incredibly fun, incredibly proud of those times. It was a great way to put research ideas creatively in front of a huge audience and do it incredibly successful. Government relations, you guys are all engaged with government relations. You may not know it, but you probably pay for it. And if you do pay for it, it's important to be engaged and be a part of that, both your state and federal. It can make a huge difference. And you personally, as a VPR, I was very fortunate with Stan Albrecht at USU. Stan said, Mark, you're walking the halls with me. You know, I'm not going to do this myself. I want you right with me. I want you very comfortable with what we're asking the federal state legislature. And we had an unusual story because at the time we were attempting to get a major infusion into graduate student funding. USU is an interesting case. I spent 7 years in that organization. I love those guys, but the only reason they're in R2 is that they're missing that heavy engagement of graduate students, PhDs in diverse degrees. And we went after very aggressively getting external funding. And when I was sitting in front of higher ed appropriations at the state level and made my case for this funding, they came back and said, well, great, but let's just do it for STEM funding. And I said, wait, don't do that. Think broader. And I used the illustration. I was partnering with the Dean of Fine Arts at that time. And we were funding fellowships that would cross arts with engineering and STEM and sciences in order to create a hybrid approach. Oh my God, they love that. And they said, Mark, forget the STEM restriction. You use that money any way you see possible to make a difference. So it has made a difference and been great fun. Many of you may also be managing undergraduate research. My comments there is create that frosting experience. It is wonderful to bring undergraduates into the research experience, but create that added excitement, that energy. Bring them into special meetings with you. Have them get the fire in their belly about frosting and about the value of undergraduate research. And I'll tell you, one of the proudest programs, I had a wonderful program at PSU, our Build Exito program, hugely successful, but probably one of the biggest machines of really driving this university-wide came out of Utah State University. I'm super, super proud of what those guys pulled off and the way they did that. So anyways, great opportunity for you there. So let me keep going here. Whoops, hit that wrong button. And some of you, a very few of them, I think about 5 of you currently have graduate schools. Well, guess what? It's a pendulum that swings. And whether you like it or not, it will swing, and many more of you will pick this up because it does change on a decade, almost by decade. My point is world-class research programs depend on strong graduate programs. And guess what? Strong graduate programs depend on world-class, or strong graduate training depends on world-class research programs. They are interlinked. And when you're thinking about that, think about the four big things the graduate programs worry about, whether they're efficiently and effectively doing a great mentoring. And that's mainly something owned by the faculty themselves. But 9 times out of 10, they've never asked themselves a question. And you can be a part of that, asking them to look at themselves and say, are we doing a good job of mentoring? Are there ways for us to do it better? Recruitment, often those of us in the STEM fields think of recruitment into individual laboratories. But when you're talking about graduate education, you're also in recruiting into major program areas. And that's critically important to managing. Do you execute well? Do you just do the business of getting a graduate student through degrees well? And do you, of course, the thing that we all hunt for, do you grab the funding and get that done? A lot of us are also trying to build out extensive postdoctoral fellows programs. These are critically important, and not only for your Carnegie metrics, but they're just important employees. Trying to make sure they get to sidestep the retirement issue. These are short-time employees. They should not be paying into retirement, and they really should be getting out there. One of my final slides here, intramural seed funding. I know many of you do this. Most of us tie up our fundings. I used to often say, and still do today, most STEM deans have far more flexible dollars than I've got as a BPR. And I still think that's very true. Some of you are scratching your head, wondering whether you should get into the game of research data and analytics. It's a great set of tools. The caution I'd have for you is make sure you talk to your faculty before you do it. And my last comment is, we started this whole conversation about relationships. At the end of the day, a lot of your success as a VPR sits with the way you handle your relationships, whether it's your president, your provost, the deans. It's important to care about these people and to care about right down to the individual. Think about their personal needs and success. And this is how you'll be successful and do well. So, and let me pause there. I know we're pretty much out of time on the nose, Najai. So I think we're in pretty good place. So let me pause, see if there's any questions. Lisa, how about a comment? I mentioned you guys quite a bit.
Well, I just want to say what's going on in the chat, Mark. Thank you again. I think the value to me of these presentations is just your insights with detail about various areas. So thank you for everything you're doing here. Always a great refresher.
You bet. You bet. Well, Lisa was one of the last people I hired at Utah State, and I'm super proud of her leadership there. It's fantastic. Okay, guys. Well, I think we're about wrapped up, and I appreciate it all. And if I can get to your chat questions, hopefully I'll be able to answer some of them, see if I can help out. This video will be available. Naisha, you want to make a comment about that and how
Yes,
people can get to it?
So the video, it will be available on our website probably around next week, Wednesday. I have to edit the video, and we also have a YouTube channel. So that is where you can find the video. The slides will also be available, and I have gotten all of the questions in the chat. I will send Mark an email with those questions, and we'll follow up with everyone. So, yep. Thank you so much, Mark. And
thank you all, guys.
presentation.
Take care. Bye-bye.